Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
If you were to survey the average dentist or office manager and ask them to list the top 5 sources of stress in their practice, almost every one of them would include cancellations and no-shows somewhere on this list. Yes, these things are not fun, and it's not just limited to dentistry. I would bet every business hates these things. And it's not hard to see why. If your business depends on pre-scheduled appointments, even if it's not as tight as a 10-minute increment of a dentist schedule, having someone just not show up or cancel 10 minutes before their appointment can throw the entire day off, and in some cases create a ton of chaos. And believe me, cancellations and no-shows have always been an issue to some degree, at least since I've been in the profession. But with that said, I seem to be hearing it mentioned more now than I heard maybe 10 or even 20 years ago. So what gives? And while you can't completely eliminate these things, they're going to happen. It's just a matter of how much, what percentage. So for this week's episode, I wanted to discuss a few ways you can keep these things manageable, cancellations and no-shows, meaning at a very low level. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And I'd like to start by discussing what we found recently when digging into this cancellation and no-show issue with newer clients. Because as I mentioned, we're hearing it more now than we used to. So if I were to ask you, how do you prevent cancellations and no-shows? What would you say? You could say, well, it's how you schedule the appointment, etc. But I would bet money that the majority of you would say that this has a lot to do with your confirmation process. And you'd be right. I mean, think about it. Why do we confirm appointments? Because we want to make sure a patient shows up, that they don't cancel or no-show. So digging into this recently, we found something very interesting. And to explain, I'd like to compare the confirmation process from back in the day, maybe 20 years ago, before the advent of all the technology we use now, to now. So let's look at the old process for a second, specifically, let's say with hygiene. So how would the hygiene confirmation process work in the average practice that, had their act together? Well, first thing that would happen when a patient finished their hygiene appointment, let's say it's June or July, I finished my appointment. At the end of the appointment, I'd book my next one 6 months from now, which would be, January. And I would also fill out a postcard to myself. I would just fill out the postcard to myself, to Jeff, and it would have my address on it with my appointment date that I had just set for 6 months from now with the scheduling coordinator. They would then take that postcard and they would put it in, I think that would be January, right? Sorry, my months aren't working in my brain here. They would put it in the January file in a little card box, okay? They'd be separated by month for January of next year. Okay, so then the 5 months would go on. I'm all good. There's no problems dentally or whatever. So then 4 weeks, sometime in December, 4 weeks prior to my January recall appointment, that postcard I filled out would come to me in the mail because the office would have grabbed that stack of postcards out, put stamps on them, and just thrown them in the mail. So I get that. Now, the average person, if they looked and they went, oh my gosh, I'm scheduled for January 17th. There's no way I can come January 17th. I'm going to be out of town. They would normally call. They would try to do something because there wasn't text back then. There wasn't email. So they would just call, hey, I can't make it January 17th. And again, if the office had their act together, they would reschedule. Let's say we're using me as the example here. They reschedule me for another date, maybe January 24th or February 6th or something like this. Assuming I got the card and I looked and I go, oh yeah, I'm going to be there January 17th. I'm not going to have a problem. I would possibly call the office to confirm. In a lot of cases, patients wouldn't. But what would happen? The office would call me 2 weeks later with a reminder. They may have even called me 4 weeks earlier, but in most cases, they're going to call me 2 weeks prior to my appointment with a reminder. So let's say my appointment is January 17th. They're going to call me January 3rd to remind me, hey, we sent you that card 2 weeks ago. Your appointment is on January 17th at 1 p.m. Okay, great. And they would tell me, listen, a few days before the appointment, we're going to be giving you a final confirmation call. Okay, great. 3 days before the appointment, I would get a phone call to confirm me for my appointment. This is the official confirmation call. The 2 week prior call was a reminder call. So I'd get the call. Let's say I pick up the phone. Yeah, no problem. I can make it. They would put a little C next to me if they had an analog hard appointment book, or if they had software, they would indicate that I was then confirmed. Now, let's say they didn't reach me 3 days before. Well, then what would they do? They would call me 2 days before. They call me the next day. same thing. If they didn't reach me 2 days before, they would call me the next day, the day before. So my appointment's on the 17th. They're going to call me the 14th, 15th, and 16th until they reach me. So they call me on the 16th. And if they don't reach me, they're probably going to leave a message that, listen, if we don't hear back from you by a certain time, we're going to possibly be filling your appointment slot with somebody else. Because the office has to make sure they can fill these appointments, and it usually would be like by noon or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, whatever time the office would set the day before my appointment. If they don't hear back from me by that point, they're going to put somebody else in my appointment slot. That gives the office time to fill that appointment, or they could maybe move tomorrow's, 2 o'clock up to 1 or something to buy themselves some time to fill this opening. But the idea was that was how I was trained as a patient. I had numerous points of personal contact. I got a postcard, I got phone calls, I got reminder calls, etc., to keep me confirmed. Now, did people have cancellations and no-shows back in those days? Yes, they did. But usually, if this was being done well, the cancellation would occur 2 weeks prior to the appointment when the first reminder call occurred, which is enormous amounts of time and plenty of time, adequate time to fill that hygiene opening. It wasn't something that you were finding out about that morning. Did they have flat out no-shows? Sure they did once in a blue moon, but it was rare for someone to just no-show. The other word we used to use was a failed appointment. It wasn't just that they no-show, they failed, right? They just didn't show. But that was rare. Cancellations would happen, but if you talked to the patient early enough, you had time to actually do something about it. And yeah, things happen. People got in car accidents. People ended up having to leave town for family emergencies. Things like that happen. You'd end up with last-minute cancellations. But for the most part, unless the office was not following basic, simple confirmation procedures, they didn't have a cancellation or a no-show problem to the point where it was adversely affecting production on a consistent basis. All right? For the doctor's schedule, it really depended, because in certain cases, you may be selling a case, let's say Thursday, and the patient's coming in Tuesday. So there isn't going to be a weeks that you're going to call before, but you're probably going to schedule the appointment on Thursday for Tuesday of next week. You're going to call them Monday to double confirm, to make sure that they're all set, especially if it's a productive appointment, and make sure that they actually show up. New patients were always confirmed verbally. And the idea with new patients, again, this is also part of the issue, you don't want to have a new patient scheduled for weeks in advance. That's just ridiculous. You want to be able to get them in immediately, unless there's some reason you can't. Like, the only reason I could think of why someone couldn't is, let's say I'm your patient and my wife wants to come see you, and we schedule her 2 weeks from now. That's the only reason why someone should be scheduled out further in advance, because she's out of the country. Okay, that would be a good reason. Or I'm a referral from my friend. A friend of mine referred me to your office, and I scheduled 2 weeks from now because I'm not going to be able to come in any sooner than that. Generally, you want to get a new patient in within 24 to 48 hours. That's just the sort of rule of thumb, because then you don't have a huge, lengthy confirmation process. It's going to, which the longer you stretch it, the more risk that you have of the person not showing up. Okay, but new patients were always called the day before. Always, 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 to make sure that they showed up. So now that's how it used to go. So let's compare that to now. Well, now most offices have some form of cloud-based software, Addit, Weave, CareCrew, etc. And let me start by saying I think these things are great. They're awesome. They're an incredible tool. The problem is, just like any tool, if I use a hammer, the way a hammer is supposed to be used, great. If I try to use it to screw in a screw, we're going to have problems. It's a tool, and it gets misused. The problem is in an attempt to be more efficient and create less work, the confirmation process now, especially in offices that we find have the biggest problems, are 100% reliant on this software with zero human contact. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, and I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I say that a lot, don't I? So if you haven't been listening to it for a while, you're like, where did you mention that? I don't remember. But I know I've mentioned this. When you send out, let's say you were to send out some form of a broad reactivation text to all of your inactive patient base. Let's say you got 4,000 inactive patients, and you send out this big broad text. Hey, you're overdue for your cleaning, blah, blah, blah. What percentage of patients are actually going to schedule based off of your text? I would bet it's going to be on average no more than 20%. Why? Because these are your low-hanging fruit. These are going to be the more compliant patients, or maybe just somebody who happens to have getting their teeth cleaned on their mind. They went and looked in the mirror, they don't like how it looks, and they're thinking of calling you, and then boom, they get a text. But generally, it's your low-hanging fruit. You're not going to get 100% compliance. You're going to get maybe 20%. Now, is it good to get 20% versus 0%? If I could send a text out and get 20%, is that better than zero? Of course it is. That saves me hundreds of phone calls. That's awesome. But that's not going to solve my problem in its entirety. It's going to require human contact. And, there was, I mentioned Care Crew. They're one of these patient management type softwares, where it'll, text and and they have some really cool stuff in that they will, and they're a member of our group purchasing organization, DDS Overhead Management. I'll put a link to that on the episode webpage. So they have a setup where you can, click the link, you send a patient, hey, you're overdue for your cleaning. They click the link, it goes to your website, you build it into your site with a widget, and then you can pick which hygienist you want to see, and it shows you their schedule, etc. So they're a Canadian company, and they started in Canada. And what they found was that when a patient would schedule online, so let's say I scheduled with your hygienist, Helen, at 3 o'clock next Thursday, and I had the ability to just lock in that appointment. Like as the patient, it wrote to your software. The average show rate in Canada was over 80%. So if I did that, there was an 80+% chance I was going to show up. You would still confirm me and whatever, but just by booking my own appointment. So they decided, they came into the United States because it's great software. They started doing this. And at first, they ran it the same way they ran it in Canada. But what happened in the US is the show rate was 23 to 25%. Or if I think it was somewhere in that range. I remember it was 23 or 24 or 25. But let's just say it was really low. So they did a modification for the US market where I can book with Helen next Thursday at 3 o'clock, but you don't technically accept the appointment. Let's say I did it at night. So you come in the next morning, you look at who it is. You're like, okay, it's Jeff. Jeff's pretty good about keeping his appointments. You can accept it. If it's, Jeff has blown off his last 8 cleanings, you might want to call Jeff before you let him have the appointment. So the point being is, when you're scheduling online, it's a lot easier to blow it off for some reason. It's a lot easier to confront a link in a text than actually talking to a person, okay? So with all of that in mind, how does the confirmation process work now that we see? Well, the person will get a text 4 weeks before from their software. They may or may not get a hard postcard, and I understand postage is expensive. Then they'll get another reminder text 2 weeks before, then a text 3 days before, etc. Now, in some cases, and I've seen this, patient doesn't respond at all. Hopefully they'll call. In some cases they don't, which is just beyond me. Or you'll have a patient 3 days before confirms, but then blows the appointment off anyway. So let's say you're doing that for hygiene and you're ending up with a lot of openings. I would do a little bit of research. How many patients have confirmed via text that have actually not shown up? Where it gets bad is I've seen offices use this for new patients, like no actual verbal contact with a new patient other than the initial appointment. Or they'll use it for implant consults with an implant funnel they're doing, which is, again, no way. I would never do that. Or large procedures on the doctor's schedule. No human contact. And these were the offices, when we're seeing this, where the show rate was terrible. Because again, I think it's easier to bail on a text than to bail on a person I actually spoke to. And part of the problem is how your office might be structured from a staffing perspective. And I want to use the word accountability, but I don't want to use it in a negative sense with regards to your staff. Because generally, if you've got a good, willing staff member, they're going to try to produce whatever product you're asking them to produce, right? They're going to try and do whatever you're asking them to do to do their job. But if I orient my staff towards, listen, you need to get confirmations, and this is how you get them with a C or a Y response to a text that we send out, then in their mind, they got the product, they got the job done. Versus I would orient whoever's handling the schedule more to, look, I think it's great that you schedule people. I think it's great that you confirm people. And these are all building blocks to the ultimate reason I have you here, which is a person who's physically in the practice. So sure, schedule the hygiene appointment. Sure, confirm the hygiene appointment, all important. But really the reason they're being paid, the reason they're there is so that the hygiene patient's actually sitting in the hygiene chair with the hygienist. That's their ultimate responsibility. Not to schedule or confirm, it's to get people here. So there's a big difference in my mind. If I have a scheduler and, let's say it's on the doctor's schedule and I'm supposed to be doing 4 veneers on a patient today, and the patient doesn't show, okay. But then I look and it says it's been confirmed, and it was confirmed via text. All right. in my mind, that's a lot different than if the patient confirmed and didn't show and actually spoke to my schedule coordinator. If they actually spoke to my schedule coordinator and said, yes, I will be there, and blew the office off, that's a much bigger deal than them doing a text. You may or may not agree with me on that, but to me, I think it's a lot easier to blow off a text. That's just my thing, right? And you might look at this and you go, well, Jeff, I don't have time for, my staff to make confirmation calls and things like this. Well, how are you costing yourself more time? Let's say you had to bake in 45 minutes a day for confirmation calls, and then you'd also find out people who aren't going to really be there, versus the time that you spend trying to fill a last minute opening or salvage your day because you had 5 patients not show up. To me, I would much rather have some prediction as to what's happening tomorrow and the day after than to find out the day of because everybody said yes to their text, if what I just said makes sense. That to me is a lot more chaotic and problematic when people don't show than to actually book in some time to reach out to people. So what would I recommend in a case like this? Again, I think these things are great. They're tools, these softwares, but I would have a little bit of a hybrid approach. And I have, from our online platform, DDS Success, we have a whole course on, number one, how to structure your schedule. It's called the Art of Scheduling. And then we have a scheduler coordinator training course, which has all of this in the lessons. But I have a policy from one of these courses on hygiene, reminders, and confirmations. I'm going to make it available if you want as a free download here on the episode webpage. That's the name of the policy, Hygiene, Reminders, and Confirmations. And it's a Word doc, and you can kind of use it to develop your own policy. And to that end, if you want to check out DDS Success, this is my shameless plug, we have a special for Dental Business RX subscribers. When you sign up for DDS Success, it's $289 a month. There are coupon codes. I'm going to give you a coupon codes. It's RX269. You can save $20 a month on the subscription. There's no contract, so you can do the subscription. If you don't like it, you can cancel, but that would make me sad. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, but it would. But yeah, check it out if you want to check this out. But this gives you kind of a general structure of how your confirmation process will work. It's primarily targeted at hygiene because that's the one that have the longest term schedule, meaning person scheduled further out in advance. But I would do a little bit of a hybrid approach on all of this. And it might look something like this. The first thing I would do, and I remember seeing this in a couple of these softwares, or maybe even your practice management software, where you can set a patient's communication preferences, because every patient is different. I work on a schedule. I'm scheduled, I can pull up my Outlook schedule and my whole schedule's there, okay? So if you book an appointment with me, I'm going to show. If you send me a reminder 2 weeks before or a week before and you ask me to confirm, I'm going to confirm and I will show up. I do not need a phone call, right? It's the same thing I arrange with the dental practice I go to. You don't have to call me. If you send me a text, this many days before I'll reply, you don't have to call, right? And that's just me. And I have a track record of showing up for my appointments, all right? Now, other people don't operate that way. A lot of people do, where they have a schedule. Some people don't. Some people need more calls or whatever. So you've got people all over the place as far as communication preferences, as well as consistency. This is part of the problem. That's why with a new patient, I would always call because I don't know this person yet. With a consult, an implant consult, I'm always calling because I don't know them. So, I don't know if they're going to show when they say they're going to show. Whereas if I have a patient for 10 years and all I got to do is send them a text, I know they're going to show up, then that's all I'm going to do, right? So I would have some way of noting that because this is part of the problem. Back in the day, it was all phone calls. There was no text. There was no email. It was phone calls and postcards. So everybody got the same treatment. Fine. Well, now you have a way to sort of give certain people some certain type of treatment and others another type of treatment based on what they prefer and their track record with you. So in the case of somebody, if you can somehow notate that, in the case of somebody that maybe doesn't have a great track record of showing up, they're getting phone calls. Someone who always does, maybe you just send texts and you're fine. Okay. But the point being is you don't want to treat everybody exactly the same. If you have a person who's always showing up when you text them and you're treating everybody that way, well, the people who won't do that won't show up. So that'd be the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do is I would follow, let's say for hygiene as an example, I would do a hybrid approach. I would do my postcards. I still like those. Postcard postage isn't that expensive. I would do my texts, maybe even emails if you like. 2 weeks out, same thing. I would do the text, but I would call. I would call everybody. 3 days out, I would call. 2 days out, I would call. The day before, I would call. Again, if I call 3 days out and they confirm, I'm not calling 2 and 1 day out, but I would still call. And if you find yourself sort of scrambling from a resources perspective, I don't have enough staff to go around to make these confirmation calls, well, then I would prioritize who I'm calling. Like, obviously, the doctor's schedule needs to get confirmed. New patients have to be confirmed. Consultations have to be confirmed. Then hygiene has to be confirmed. You know, if I have newer employees, I'm not going to have them confirming the doctor's schedule. I'm going to have them confirm maybe the hygiene schedule. Easier to teach them, you see. But if I've got a $10,000 procedure or procedures on the doctor's schedule the day after tomorrow at 1 o'clock or at 11 o'clock, rather, I'm not having my new employee call. I'm calling as the scheduler. And then I would orient your staff to the responsibilities to get people to show up, not to confirm them. That's just part of the building block to getting them showing up. Obviously, they have to confirm the patient because they can't just leave the patient unconfirmed. But really what we're going for is that the patient actually arrives in the practice, not just confirms. Okay? And then obviously the other thing I would do, and I've talked about this before, is with larger procedures on the doctor's schedule, and this is funny, the newer clients we talked to had some basic sales training. The patients that showed up the most consistently were the larger procedures in the doctor's schedule. Why? Because these patients were prepaying for their treatment. So obviously with a big case, I would, you do your presentation, get the patient to prepay or work out their financial arrangements at the close, there's a better chance that they're going to show up. But I would do a hybrid approach to this. I would bring phone calls back in. And one thing you could do, because every office is different, you might want to develop some policy that works with you. And how would I do this? If I'm the doctor, maybe the doc and the office manager, and maybe you have a really, good experience, a highly experienced scheduler, the three you can sit together and brainstorm and look at what has worked versus what has not. And you have to be honest with yourselves here. You're not looking for what's the easiest thing to do. You're looking for what has worked. And then maybe turn that into your policy. Because in my mind, again, it's worth it. The added work when someone doesn't show is a lot more than you're going to have by just adding an efficient confirmation process. It's going to cost you a lot more time when people don't show up. Anyway, shorter episode this week. I have that policy for you as a download if you'd like it. You can download it for free. I also have that DDS Success code, the RX269 code for you if you want to save some money on DDS Success. I do hope that this helps. I do recommend that you do this. And, again, the technology is great and I would use it, but you can't really... I'm not trying to sound like weird in this sense, but you can't replace technology with people in every sense. There still has to be someone to run the technology. We're not there yet, okay? So you're going to have to, it might seem easier. Yes, it can increase efficiency, but you're going to still have to keep people involved in this if you want to make sure that your schedule is as close to 100% full as you'd like to be. Anyway, all right, so I hope this helps. If you want to have, or if you have more questions about MGE or you want to find out more, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.